Okay, welcome to 1.4. We want to talk about, in the evaluation of arguments, whether an argument is valid, sound, strong, or cogent. So there's a lot of terms that we're going to bring back together, so keep in mind things that we've talked about in previous discussions. With a deductive argument, we have certainty. With an inductive argument, we have probability. So what we want to do is we begin to go forward. So we've been putting together a process of evaluating arguments, okay, and so I'm going to do 4 steps here. So these are things that we've already talked about, so it's a little bit of a review, which isn't a bad thing, but just keeps us on task. We're going to add some new stuff as we go along, and then your homework assignments will help you to put it all in perspective. So step number 1, excuse me, is the passage an argument? If the answer is yes, we continue. If the answer is no, we have nothing to evaluate. Okay, we covered this in section 1.2. Step number 2, what is the inferential claim? So we have 2 types. Okay, this is again review. If the premises are true, the conclusion is true with certainty. It's inferred, that's deductive. Excuse me, inductive says if the premises are true, the conclusion is probable. Okay, or true with some degree of probability. That is inductive. We discussed that in the last video, section 1.3. Okay, there's different inferential claims, and each have different analysis. So once again, one deductive, the other inductive. I guess I'm pointing at the screen in front of me. You can't see it, but I guess you're seeing me point, but you see the screen. So just work with me. Evaluate the inference, number 3. If it's deductive, if the premises are true, does the conclusion necessarily follow? Okay, so is the conclusion part of the thought, part of the argument? Does it follow that the conclusion is relevant to the argument? If the answer is yes, we have a valid argument, deductive, and it's valid. If the answer is no, then we still have a deductive argument, but it's not valid. It's an invalid argument. If we have an inductive argument, the premises are true, does the conclusion probably follow? If we say yes, the answer is going to be strong. If we say no, then the argument is going to be weak. Once again, keeping in mind that inductive deals with probabilities, deductive deals with certainty. So here's some observations that you have to make sure you grab hold of. Strength and weakness are relative. Okay, what is strong? If I can bench press 150 pounds, am I strong? If I can bench press 225 pounds, am I strong? Okay, if I set myself next to my son, I bench press maybe 145, 150 pounds. He bench presses 2 1/4. Am I strong or is he strong? So it's relative. Strength is relative. Weakness is relative. Okay, but if something is valid, there's not a whole lot of question. So with strength and weakness, which is relative, inductive, we have a lot of gray area. We have a lot of subjectivity. With valid and invalid, we have certainty. We have very little gray area. It's a deductive, right? And we see it with great objectivity. So keep those things in mind. Okay, whether an argument is strong or not is a bit up to interpretation. But whereas if it's valid or invalid, it has nothing to do with interpretation. It's very, very black and white. Okay? Step number 4 then, are the premises true? So in a deductive argument, okay, we know that it's valid if all the premises are true. And this is a very important slide. We know that it's valid if all the premises are true. And I'm looking real quickly in the book. I didn't necessarily put this out of the book, and I can't remember. So this is a slide you'll want to make a copy of and keep in mind. Keep in your book. So if it's valid, all premises are true, we know it's a sound argument. If it's a valid argument, which means that the conclusion flows with and is part of the ideology and the thought process of the argument, it's valid, but one or more of the premises are false, then we have an unsound argument. Okay? If it is invalid if the arguments are unsound. So if we have any of the arguments are unsound, we know now it's invalid. So the only way it's valid if all the premises are true. Now this will take variations off of this as we go through the semester. But I want you to get to the basics. Once you have the basics, it's easier for us to spread out and move. If you don't have the basics, movement becomes very, very difficult. In an inductive argument, it's either strong if sufficient premises are true. Okay, so if it's a strong argument, we've determined it's strong based on the last slide, right? The slide before that. We know that it's strong because the conclusion probably follows, okay? If sufficient premises are true, then we call that cogent, okay? If it's strong but not enough of the premises are true, then we would call it uncogent. And a weak argument is always uncogent. Okay? An invalid argument will always be unsound. And a weak argument will always be uncogent. There's no way around that. Those are two things set in stone. What is a cogent argument? It's an inductive argument that is strong and has all true premises. An uncogent argument is an inductive argument that is weak, has one or more false premises, fails to meet the total evidence requirement, or any combination of these. And that's found on page 51 of your textbook. I just read it straight out of paragraph 2. Okay, so keep in mind, a weak argument will always be uncogent, no questions asked. An invalid argument will always be unsound, no questions asked. This will be very helpful for you when you do your homework assignment for sections 1.4. So let's talk about a few observations we've made, and then this will be a short one. We'll be done shortly. An argument is sound or not, but we can talk about different degrees of cogency. Okay? But if it's weak, it's uncogent. One false premise makes an argument unsound. That may not be the case with cogency. So it can still have a false premise, be unsound, but still be cogent. If it's weak, once it's sound, once we have let me repeat that. Okay, if we have a false premise, it can be unsound but still be cogent. Okay, an argument can be valid or strong but still have a false conclusion. So once again, understand the ideologies. Okay, just because the conclusion is false doesn't mean it's not valid or it's not strong, right? Keeping those things in mind. I think as you do the homework, it will be very clear. If you have questions, make sure you bring them to class with you. We'll talk about 1.4 in class briefly. We'll talk about the assignments and homework assignment. We'll go over them when you leave class. Hopefully, you'll understand this. Write down your questions. Bring them to me. We'll talk about them then. Thank you.